Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans worldwide, we have a really fantastic, timely, and interesting guest joining us today. We've been trying to make this happen for a while, and the timing actually couldn't have been better.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, so aloha, Tulsi.
Yes, start the conversation with aloha.
The great and powerful Tulsi Gabbard has joined us here in New York City.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Paul.
And I wish you aloha. You have taught me about the aloha spirit.
It's so necessary, especially now, don't you think?
Yes, very, very much so. And you brought like sunshine to New York. It's like sunny.
I was surprised. I was packing up early this morning, and I asked my sister to go and check the temperature because I was at coats and jackets and scarves, and yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful day.
And we normally start the interview with a drink or a cocktail, and I ask folks.
We are truly making history today, right?
Yeah, we are. You actually, and I asked you what you would like to drink, and you said, I don't drink.
Yes.
And so as the first, which I think is an insight into someone, right? It's not so much about what you drink, but it's about who you are. So tell us, why don't you drink?
I never have. I've never drank, never tried any different drugs. I just high on life, man.
In your whole life?
My whole life.
How did you manage that in Hawaii?
Yeah,
That's
see,
like really impressive.
What you trying to say about Hawaii,
like,
Paul?
You never smoked in Hawaii. That's like Barack Obama didn't pull that off.
No, I just I honestly, I never wanted to. I never really felt tempted. Some of my friends, partook. But yeah, literally, I was just very content and satisfied, and never felt the need to seek any help from anything else.
Got it. So, but we have water. So
yeah, we've got water. Like if I'm out at an event or something like that, usually I'll ask for a Shirley Temple because that's always a good bet, safe bet.
Do you drink caffeine? Like, how do you
I don't actually. I don't. I don't because I do my best to stay healthy and try to get good sleep and stay hydrated and all those things. And I just find when you start supplementing that, they become crutches. We're not actually seeing like, hey, what's going on with my body right now? And so I try to stay away from that kind of stuff and make sure that I am actually healthy, because this body has a long way to go. I got to make sure it works.
Well, and that came up in the last debate, right? Talking about whether people were physically able to be president. And
That's true.
Are you the youngest candidate?
Pete. I think Pete Buttigieg is the youngest.
By like a year or two?
Something like
close,
that,
right?
Yeah.
But you are probably the only candidate who's posting Instagram videos of you doing mixed martial arts.
That is true. That is true. I had so much fun. If I can just indulge me for a second.
Please, go for it.
So I'm friends with a guy who's a manager for a bunch of UFC fighters. He represents some fighters from Hawaii, who's how I got to know him. And he represents this amazing fighter out of China named Zheng Li. I saw on her Instagram one day that she was trying to come here to Boston for fight night recently, but her visa was rejected. So I called Brian, her manager. I was like, what the hell's going on? She's been here before. She just made history in becoming the first fighter out of China ever to become a UFC champion. She's 29 years old. And just amazing, talented, skilled fighter. And anyway, there was some bureaucracy and some paperwork. We were able to help. We contacted folks who could help her just get the interview she needed, straighten out the problems. Long story short, she came. I happened to be in Boston that day, and they let me come and like train with her, and I got to kick and punch some pads. And I had the most fun doing that than I've had in a while.
I can imagine it was necessary.
I was laughing the whole time.
I'm trying to think of all the candidates on stage, and I'm trying to think if anybody could kick your ass. I don't think there's anybody up there, right? And now, especially now I see you training in mixed martial arts, you're coming from the military, right?
And I've done, military, obviously we learn basics, combatives and all that kind of stuff, but I grew up doing martial arts too. I was, my younger sister was more into like becoming the ballerina and the actress and everything else, and I was, martial arts and having fun rough and tumble with our brothers.
And it prepared you well for the rough and tumble cage fight that is the presidential election. So anything interesting
more ways
going
than
on?
one.
Anything interesting going on
It's
lately,
totally boring. I'm trying to pinch myself to stay awake through this whole thing.
So we scheduled this a couple weeks ago, right? And in the meantime, this clash has now erupted between you and Hillary Clinton. So
unexpectedly so.
So what's your latest take on this? And let me ask you, most of all, everybody's tracking on this from the outside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Has she called you, or have you called her?
No.
So you've met her before in the past,
years
right,
ago.
assume?
Yeah.
But the two of you haven't directly spoken.
No.
Since all this happened.
No. It came as quite a surprise, to be honest, once I started seeing the headlines popping up on Friday. I was traveling to Iowa from New Hampshire, and I was quite surprised to see the comments that she was making and the news stories that were being generated from it, and obviously felt pretty both disheartened and outraged that these kinds of accusations and allegations that somehow I'm being groomed by or an asset of a foreign country or Russia in this particular instance, again, without providing any kind of facts or evidence or anything whatsoever to back it up. This would be outrageous coming from anyone towards anyone. We're talking about coming from the former First Lady, former Secretary of State, former United States Senator for the United States. And these allegations being waged against someone who I currently still am very proud to wear the cloth of our nation, serving as a soldier now for going on 17 years.
And I ask because now, the swirl is happening on Twitter and in the cable media, and the questions of what did she mean, right? And you came back and hit her, right? You called her the queen of the warmongers, right? But she hasn't clarified. She hasn't issued an additional statement. So and that frankly surprises
except
me.
through her spokesperson.
Right.
I think his name is Nick Merrill.
Yeah.
A number of the media actually followed up through him, trying to seek clarification of was she referring to Tulsi Gabbard, and the response was yes, or he said something like if the nesting doll fits.
Right.
And there were a number of, I think, follow-ups where that was confirmed. So, to me, given that opportunity to clarify, if that's not what she meant, that never actually occurred.
Yeah, I mean, I've been pretty outspoken about this. I know other people have as well. I mean, it's an incredibly serious accusation, but and not just to a presidential candidate, but also to someone who you currently serve in Congress.
Yes.
You sit on the Armed Services Committee.
That's right.
And you serve in the National Guard. You're an officer in the Hawaii National Guard.
Yes.
So what I said was, if she has some information, first of all, she should provide it. And if she did, David Plouffe's podcast is probably not the most appropriate place to drop it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've talked about this a bit, but, what do you think's going on here? Like why did she do this?
Look, only she can answer that. But to me, it is very clear. I think there's two things that are driving this. Number one is when in 2016 I was serving as a vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. I had started in that position, was appointed that position in 2013, shortly after I was elected to Congress. And I resigned as vice chair so that I could endorse Bernie Sanders in the presidential primary in that race, because as an officer of the DNC, you're supposed to remain neutral and not actually get involved in primaries. I was warned by a lot of folks in Washington, a lot of folks who you and I both know, people who I'm friends with and who care about me, saying, Tulsi, you can kiss your political career goodbye. The Clintons never forget. This is something that you're going to have to deal with forever, as long as you're in politics. And to me, the both direct and indirect smears of my candidacy for president that began literally on the day that I announced that I was running are yet another wave of this kind of retribution. And secondly, and you know me, I've been very outspoken both throughout my time in Congress and especially in my presidential campaign about the kind of sea change in our foreign policy that we need to make, away from the Hillary Clinton doctrine of interventionism, of being the world's police, of waging regime change wars like the ones that you and I have both served in, versus the foreign policy that I seek to lead our country with, which would end that, end the long-held policy of trying to be the world's police, going and toppling dictators in other countries, and the ensuing nation building that follows, and instead make sure that our military is being used to fulfill the mission that we take an oath to, serve and protect the interests of the American people and our country.
Sorry, I want to come back to that, but I also want to go under the hood here. Like over the last couple of years, I met you, I think, when you first got elected to Congress.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It was, how many years ago now?
I was sworn in January of 2013.
So you came in like a new wave, and every 2 years or so, there'd been a new wave of veterans on both sides of the aisle.
That's right.
And when I was running IAVA, we'd meet all the new veterans.
Yeah.
You know, left, right, and center, and you and I worked together on issues pretty much from the moment you got there.
That's right.
And you were frankly someone we could depend on.
Yeah.
And you were someone who we could also depend on to go across the aisle.
All the time.
You and I worked together with Brian Mast, a Republican from Florida, on burn pit
That's right.
legislation, toxin exposures, on issues for veterans. You were someone who could go across the aisle. And I watched how that pissed people off.
Yeah.
Right? But over time, it seems like you've gone from, you know, one of their favorites to now. Is there anybody in the Democratic Party that is more hated? Who's more hated than the Democratic Party, you or Donald Trump right now?
I would say Donald Trump.
But I've never seen it. Like, you know what I'm talking about.
Neither have I. Neither have I.
Like if I mention there are a couple of people if I mention on Twitter, okay, like some crazy shit comes out, right?
Yeah.
If it's Meghan McCain, Chris Cuomo, sometimes Rachel Maddow, but Tulsi Gabbard. You mentioned Tulsi Gabbard, it brings out fire from all sides.
Yeah.
And so, you know, really, you know, at this point, I've seen it so consistently. People are saying you're not a Democrat. People are saying you should leave the party. But I want to stay on the Russia piece, right? Part of the accusation has been that you may not want Russian support, you may not be actively seeking Russian support, but you're getting it because they want to see you blow up the system, right? Is that something, how do you feel about that? And you've never openly said, I don't want their support.
I have said that before,
Okay,
and I'll say it again.
Please.
I don't want any support or intervention of any form, whether it be from Russia or any other foreign country. That's not healthy for our democracy. Yeah. But I want to bring us back to kind of the main issue here, which I think people are using all this stuff about Russia and foreign agent as a distraction around the actual message that I'm delivering, that I've been consistent on all along, not only in my presidential campaign, but throughout the time that I've been in Congress. This is one of the main reasons I ran for Congress in the first place. And so many of these people, to include Hillary Clinton and her kind of proxies, people like Neera Tanden and others, they resort to smear tactics and name-calling and baseless accusations because they refuse to debate me on the substance of the policy changes that I'm talking about why we need to get away from the Hillary Clinton legacy of foreign policy that I feel has been terribly destructive, and instead move in a direction that's actually in the best interest of our country, of our national security, of our troops, and by the way, would provide us the opportunity to lead and be a force for good in the world.
So I think because we've known each other and because we have the time here and space to talk about issues, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to have to cut to commercial. You know, I think it gives us an opportunity to have a real discussion about this. Like with regard to Putin, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of clearly clear the air. I think Putin is an enemy of our country. I think that there were not interventions in our elections, they were attacks on our elections. I view them almost as an act of war, right? Do you think Putin is our enemy?
Here's why I don't use those words lightly. Because if you're saying whether it's Putin or some other leader or some other country is our enemy, then, you know, my soldier hat comes on. Okay, if they are our enemy, then we must go to war to defeat that enemy. And when we're talking about,
just defend against him, right? Like we don't necessarily have to go to war.
Well,
with him,
I mean, then you're leaving it up to interpretation. I think these words are very dangerous and lead us to a place, especially when we're dealing with a nuclear-armed country like Russia, nuclear-armed country like China, that if we use words in a careless way, what we're doing is we're escalating tensions that push us closer and closer to a new Cold War with countries that, I mean, we have thousands of nuclear weapons pointed at each other, still on hair trigger alert, that could be launched at a moment's notice.
But for you, it's a strategic way of approaching someone who could potentially do us harm. But I think what folks are looking for, right, and that's why I want to give you an opportunity to expand on it. You don't think Putin's a good guy.
No.
Right? And in the explanation of how you would approach him, you may not call him an enemy, but what would you call him?
Well, look, here's
if he's not an enemy, then what is he?
There are very clear issues that the United States, that we have with Russia. There are very significant issues that we have with China. What I am against is pushing us into a nuclear war. And I'll tell you why. And I think everyone can agree with that.
I want to keep you focused on it though. But what is Putin, right? Like in your accepting that you have a different way of categorizing
absolutely,
him, right?
Absolutely.
If we're looking at the battle space, you're a soldier, I'm a soldier.
So let's look at it.
So
if Putin, there are issues where we are adversaries. Mm-hmm. But I think there are also issues where we have to de-escalate tensions and say, hey, how do we work in the common interests of our people and of the planet? And reduce, for example, reducing tensions that have brought us to this point of being on the brink of nuclear catastrophe. Nuclear strategists are saying we are closer to the brink of nuclear catastrophe than we have been for a long time before. We have to be able to find those areas of common interest and further those interests. We have to stay focused on what's the interest of the American people in the United States. As it relates to our elections, I'm very concerned about the threats and the vulnerabilities of whether it's Russia or any other country trying to come in and manipulate our elections. It's why I introduced legislation, the Securing America's Elections Act, because there are still 14 states in our country have no paper record whatsoever of the votes that are cast, meaning that if someone comes in and tries to actually hack into those systems, manipulate what votes are cast for whomever, change the outcome of our elections, then our democracy is finished. Because people then will have no faith in the system that their votes are actually being cast and being counted to form our representative democracy.
I appreciate you expanding on that because I think it needs to be expanded. This is a soundbite world right now, right? And on some levels, are you a casualty of the soundbite world? Or are you misunderstood? Or how really, right? Like, because I've told you, sometimes people say to me, what the hell's up with Tulsi?
Yeah.
Right? Why can't she just say Putin's a bad guy?
Yeah, look, I think
Why
they're
can't she
saying
just say Putin's an enemy?
Because I'm interested in what's in the best interest of our country. It might make people happy. It might make them feel better to say things. You've got a good tweet or a good this or that. I don't give a shit about that. I care about our country. Mm-hmm. I care about the kinds of policies that lead those in positions of power to put our brothers and sisters in uniform needlessly at risk or put the American people at risk. There are consequences both to the rhetoric that's being used and the decisions that are being made. My fear and my concern is both with Washington today as well as with many of the candidates who are running for president now is that they lack the kind of understanding and experience in national security and foreign policy, very quick to send out a tweet, but lacking that experience and understanding necessary to fulfill the job of commander-in-chief on day one. I think that's something that sets me apart.
I think it does. And I think, I'm going to expand on this in the intro, but you have appealed to many people that are independents. A huge part of our audience, I am an independent, we are unaffiliated. I think you have huge appeal among independents. I've seen that. Mm-hmm. You have appeal among Republicans. Meghan McCain loves you, right? There's lots of people on the right who talk about you, but is that causing this attack from the Democratic Party because it's a purity test and you don't pass a purity test?
Yeah, I think what it is
it seems like the Democrats are eating their own, right?
Yeah.
So, but does that include you? When we all of us who want to see Donald Trump lose, all of us, Republicans, Democrats, and everything in between.
Yeah.
When we see you all fighting with each other, it looks like, to put a military, it looks like friendly fire.
So here's where I would say there's a difference between petty squabbles and actually speaking the truth that I believe will help strengthen my party, the Democratic Party, and make it so that our party is taken back from the corporate influence that pervades our party, taken back from the warmongering influence of the military-industrial complex and the kind of leadership that's come from Hillary Clinton, and make it once again the Democratic Party that fights for and champions for peace. What happened to that party? What happened to the party that is the party fighting for working people in this country? That is the party that is leading the charge to protect our planet from the environmental threats that we face. The current chair of the Democratic Party overturned a decision that was made previously to stop taking fossil fuel corporate money. Now that money is welcome into the Democratic Party. That, I believe, should be once again the party that says, no, we don't want your fossil fuel money. We are fighting for the protection of our planet and will lead with the bold kind of change that we need to see. That's the kind of leadership that I seek to bring to our party. I believe it will strengthen our party. We don't get to that better place unless we're willing to call BS, even if it means it's within our own family. You don't get better if you just close your eyes, stick your head in the sand and say, hey guys, let's just stick together and hope things are gonna get better. It's not gonna happen.
But I gotta tell you, Tulsi, sometimes I watch on stage and I say, you know what, I wish you guys would take this off stage. Because Donald Trump cheers when he sees you all ripping each other apart on stage, right? And that sometimes we're talking about difference in strategy, right? And I respect that you look at things strategically and you present a different type of strategy. But to build on this, and I thank you, the first presidential candidate we've ever had on Angry Americans. And I think a lot of people are going to be hearing from you for the first time. Many of them are here because they're fans of yours or supporters of yours, or maybe they hate you, right? They're coming for a lot of reasons. The likelihood is that you're not going to win the nomination, right? Now
it's soon. It's early, Paul.
Great.
Come on.
And I'm going to say this of every candidate. Every candidate that comes on here, if they're polling below 10%, look, the Jets could win the Super Bowl too, but it's unlikely, right? So what I ask you is, in the same way I would ask, the general manager of the Jets, what's your long-term strategy? So if you lose the nomination and you want to stay in the Democratic Party, the convention comes up, what are you going to do? For people who do want to support you and they want to say, you know what, she's not going to make it. She's not going to get the nomination, but I want to support her. What comes, you're going to take it all the way to the convention?
I am taking it all the way to the convention.
And then if you don't get the nomination at the convention, then what?
I mean, come on. You're asking about a hypothetical that who the hell knows what is going to happen.
I'm actually asking you to do military planning, right? Because you're going to plan for the most dangerous course of action, the most likely course of action. And we scenario plan. That's what we do as military officers.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to push you. I would have a battle plan for if I lose, if I win, if it's somewhere in between. You can tell me you don't want to share your plan. But you must have a plan for what happens if you don't get the nomination at the convention.
Well, look, I am running to win. You can say I don't have a chance, but a lot of voters might disagree and do disagree. I think Jimmy Carter was polling at 1% at this point, and he was running for president.
I mean, no disrespect.
No. I'm laying it out. I'm laying it out.
It's also in part for people who want to know. Oh, and I'm going to ask this of anybody who comes on here who's not polling at 20% or higher. The likelihood is low, right?
Well, here's the thing.
It could happen. You could run the table. You could win the nomination. You come out from behind. But if not, those people who want to give you $5 or want to donate, I think they want to know what happens afterward.
The polls, the national polls that are coming out over and over again are showing who has the most national name recognition. That even as these polls are coming out, they're making it sound like, well, the election will be held tomorrow. When you actually dig down into the polls, the majority of people are saying they still have not made up their minds. And B, that even if they're saying they're going to support one of the top 3 candidates today, I think one of the polls showed 80% of those people said they could easily be convinced otherwise. So our challenge and opportunity is getting better known, getting in front of people, sharing with them my experience and leadership and what I seek to bring to this job as Commander-in-Chief. And I think there's a lot of precedence that shows folks who are polling where we're polling now have staged a comeback and have gone through and done very well or won the nomination. There could be any number of outcomes. I will take this all the way to the convention, and we will execute from there based on what happens. My goal and my interest, as you know very well, is to serve my country in whatever way that I feel I can best do so. So if it works out that I'm not the Democratic nominee, then I'll continue to find a way to best serve our country.
And does that mean definitely staying in the Democratic Party?
Yes.
So you will not leave and run as a third-party candidate or as an independent?
No.
There's a lot of people who are disappointed to hear that. A lot of independents and unaffiliated.
Perhaps. I've been asked this question a ton of times over the last several months. Again, something that Hillary Clinton said that absolutely baseless, and if she'd been listening, she would have known. No, my interest and goal is not to just leave the party and run separately. As I've said, my goal is to actually strengthen our party. I think we can and we must do so much better for Democrats and for the country. And in whatever capacity I'm in, I'm going to continue to try to find ways to do that.
And I say that as someone, like many Americans, who is sick and tired of the parties. and sick and tired of the negative influence they have, the divisive influence they have. 40% of this country is made up of independents and unaffiliateds. And if Howard Schultz is all we got, we're disappointed. But those independents are going to have to choose, and if they're planning for the long term, right? I think there is a question of who will become the legacy of the independents, who will be the new independents, and who will be the new Democratic Party. I mean, if you're staying in the party, you're tuning up for fights for the next 30 years, right? Because the Democratic Party is going more and more left. And people are viewing, you're fascinating, Tulsi, in that you're not really more of the center, right? A lot of your policies are
I don't fit in any of the boxes.
No, but you're viewed as someone who is a counter to the left, in part because of your national security background. So every guest I talk to, I consider an iconic, important, or inspiring American. And you're in that category, I think, unequivocally. And it's also important to note, people don't know, you are the first female combat veteran in American history to run for president.
Yeah.
And I talked to you about this a bit on the radio, but I want to give you a chance to talk about what that means. Yeah. Beyond the politics, beyond the party, even beyond Tulsi.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what does that mean for America, for little boys and girls growing up in this country to see you up on that stage and to hear you running for president? Inside your heart and your spirit, you talk about the aloha spirit.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean for you, and what does it mean for our country?
Oh, well, I just tell you in a deeply personal way, some of the messages and emails or DMs on Twitter or Instagram that I get from other veterans or people who are still currently serving, people I've never met in my life, and this happens almost every day. There's no greater compliment to a soldier than for someone to say, if I had to have someone in my foxhole, I would choose you. And I hear from people who say that they would be honored to serve under my command as Commander-in-Chief. As a soldier, that is the greatest possible words you could hear from a fellow service member. We were in Iowa 2 nights ago, and there was a woman who brought her 2 little girls to our town hall and going through the Q&A and asking questions. And a little girl, I think she was probably maybe 6 or 7 years old. Her name was Beatrice, and so she got the microphone and she said, "I want to know what you're going to do as president for us kids." And I just, it's so cool to be able to have these conversations and to see from little Beatrice and so many others that they matter, that they are part of this conversation, that we are doing this for them and for our future, and that they are our future. We were in South Carolina a couple of weeks ago, stopped in a little town, gosh, I don't remember the name of the town right now, but Orangeburg. It was Orangeburg. And we stopped and picked up some drinks from the grocery store, and there was a 17-year-old high school girl working the cash register, and I introduced myself. She's like, "What? You're running for president? I never heard of you." And so we just started talking, and she's like, "You the only woman running for president?" I said, "Nope, there's a few of us actually." She's like, "Man, that's so cool." She said, "I'm going to run for president one day. I just decided right here, right now." And 17-year-old black girl in South Carolina, just having that little moment with her, she's like, "Yeah, what's the big deal? I can do what you're doing, and I will." And that kind of impact, I think, is incredible for our country, about what's happening here, how we're breaking down barriers, opening doors, and that we're seeing more and more veterans across party lines stepping up and saying, "Hey, I am bringing an experience that is important to our country," and that it is an incredible way to continue that service.
I think a lot of folks who don't know you or don't know Hawaii, they think aloha and maybe they think soft. But people who know people of Hawaii and know the tradition of military service and know, the story of Senator Akaka and Senator Enui and others, know that aloha is also a fighting spirit and a pride and a take no shit kind of attitude. And I think people saw that in the debate when I tweeted that you Kamala Harris, right? In the same way she came at Biden, and there was this fight. Okay, I call it a fight. People ask, it was a fight. It looked like a fight, right? And you got into a battle with Kamala Harris, but you showed a fighting spirit. And I think that is different, and especially in the Democratic Party. And it's tied back to, I know, your roots and your military service, but the question I'm really been dying to ask you, you've spoken about what you call regime change wars, and you've been very critical of Syria and others. You're still in the National Guard.
Yeah.
If you get deployed to fight in a regime change war, will you go?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I think the answer is yes. Our responsibility, both as officers and soldiers, is to obey legal orders. So that's what I would look for first. Is this a legal order coming from the president and commander-in-chief? And if the answer is no to that, then I think the answer to your question would be different. This comes back to why it's so important that we have veterans' voices serving in leadership in our country, because we have been through and understand the cost and consequences of those decisions that are made in the Oval Office as well as in Congress. It's one of the reasons why I worked with now passed away, but Congressman Walter Jones on introducing legislation called the No More Presidential Wars Act. Right. Because our Constitution mandates that Congress be the body that declares war. Congress has ceded that responsibility for so long, failing to take action when action was necessary, and the executive branch has taken advantage of that and abused that power, claiming almost without exception, saying, well, under Article 2, I can do whatever I want. It's dangerous. It's dangerous, and it's our men and women in uniform that pay the price.
But you're this contrast, right, of the warrior peacemaker. You're the peace candidate.
Yeah, I'm a realist. I think
not a pacifist.
Not a pacifist.
Right.
No, I think it's being a realist about the world that we live in, the threats that exist to our country, and the reason, why we serve in the military. I enlisted motivated by what happened on 9/11 to go after the evil that visited us on that day and defeat it. Unfortunately, sometimes war is necessary to protect the safety and security of the American people. But what I am strongly against, and what I have been and continue to be fighting for, is to stop needlessly sending our brothers and sisters to go and fight in wars, toppling dictators that actually undermine our national security and strengthen terrorist groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda, and actually dishonor the great sacrifices that are made both by our servicemen and women and their families.
So, the regime change war term is one that you use a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to push this and understand, because you are also, only 3 combat veterans are running for president. It's Joe Sestak, Pete Buttigieg, and you.
That's right.
Right? You're the only one that's still in. They're out, right? I don't think Buttigieg is in the IRR. I think Sestak is retired.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Right? So you still
That's
go to
correct.
drill.
That's right.
Right? You train with a unit.
Yep.
You wear the uniform. You
Yep.
know, you leave Congress. Like, there are a couple members of Congress that do it.
Yeah.
It's an unusual thing to do. It's a hard thing. I think Lindsey Graham deployed for a couple weeks at one point a couple years ago. It happens, right? But it's a very unusual and unique position to be in. But when you talk about regime change wars, how far does it go? Because this is where I want to give you a chance to talk about it.
Sure.
If Hitler is a regime, would you support the overthrow of Hitler?
I don't think that comparing World War II to a regime change war like those we've seen in Iraq is an adequate or an apples to apples comparison. It's not.
I know it's not, but I want to give an example of to understand your thinking,
sure,
and to give you a chance to explain how far does it go.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes the way the regime change war terminology has been used is also with respect to bad actors who are massacring their people.
Absolutely.
And the criticism you get that I see more than anything else is about Assad and about Syria. And people ask, why did she meet with Assad? Why won't she call Assad a war criminal? Right? So it's intertwined. I don't want to just give you hypotheticals about Hitler.
Yeah.
But if I want to see how far does your philosophy or your values extend?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's important that we begin by asking a couple of important questions. What is our objective? Basic question that we've got to ask and answer before executing any kind of military operation. Second, does that objective best serve the interests of the American people and our national security interests? Third, when we're looking at issues or situations like those you're talking about, humanitarian disasters, brutal dictator causing great harm and suffering for their own people, will our action help the people in these countries, or will it make things worse? We have seen time and time again, not only throughout our lifetimes, but going back farther even farther back in the Middle East, in Central America and South America, how these regime change wars or efforts to topple dictators in other countries have often been waged, most often waged actually, in the guise of humanitarianism, when in fact those actions have made the lives worse off for the people in those countries,
But if we can
whether
stop
it's suffering or death
genocide,
or destruction.
just to put a point on it, right? And this, you and I don't agree on a lot of things. We agree on a lot of things, but this is one that's hard for me to understand, right? If the goal is to stop a genocide, and it's being waged by a regime, is that not an exception to your rule?
Well, will overthrowing that regime actually stop a genocide? That's the first. No, that's an important question. So this has been the whole issue is since 2011.
If we can throw out Assad and we can stop a genocide and stop war crimes.
That's the question here. Since 2011, our country has been waging a regime change war using many different tactics to be able to do so. First, it was through covert means. This has all been published publicly. CIA arming and equipping terrorist groups like al-Qaeda and other jihadist groups, because in Syria, they have been and continue to be the most powerful and effective ground force fighting to overthrow the government, saying, all right, we're just going to help you guys go in and overthrow the government. Then there's these draconian sanctions that have been in place and escalated in the last several years, similar to those that Saudi Arabia has on the people in Yemen, causing a lot of hardship and suffering, not for the Syrian government, but for the people, completely crippling any access to economic benefit, food, clean water, medicine. The Syrian people are the ones who are suffering the most from that. This is basically like a modern day siege war tactic. Number three, if you look at, okay, so we want to go and overthrow a brutal dictator to be able to help the people in his country. Well, the people are suffering more as a result of the tactics that we are using. And by the way,
debatable. We're debating the cause.
Well,
on some
okay,
level,
so
right?
if you look at, fine, okay, let's say we're successful.
No fly zone.
No. Let's just finish this one. Let's finish this one.
Go ahead, please.
So overthrow Assad. Let's say all of this works. Assad is overthrown. Who is the most powerful and effective force on the ground in Syria that will fill that vacuum and take over that leadership? It's not going to be some puppet government that we, the United States, choose. It will be the most powerful force on the ground, and that is a jihadist force
right now
of al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups.
Where if you are commander-in-chief, you can organize a global force for good that goes in and comes in after Assad? Can you be the president that creates a legitimate UN army that goes in there and knocks out Assad and sets up stability and is peaceful and gets the water running and all of that? I mean, there's just no scenario under the sun where it could ever work out.
The reason why I say that with such confidence is because it has been tried and failed over and over and over and over and over again. That if you have outside forces coming in and trying to dictate to a people who their leader should or should not be and what kinds of changes they should or should not have, what kind of democracy or constitution they should or should not have, it doesn't work. Yeah. It is terrible, and it is heartbreaking to see what's happening there. Ultimately, it is the people of Syria who will be the ones who make that determination about what kinds of changes they want to see. And I met when I was in Syria with no one likes to talk about this. Yes, I met with Assad. I met with the political opposition who have been fighting from day one to try to get him out of office. The difference is these are people who are fighting for a political revolution, fighting to strengthen their democracy, fighting to bring about very specific constitutional reforms that will actually reflect the desires of the Syrian people. They hate the fact that the United States, Saudi Arabia, France, Qatar, and all these other countries are coming in and intervening in their business and turning what was the beginning of a political revolution into an all-out war.
The thing I want to try to give you a real opportunity to expand on is like you won't knock out Assad, right?
It's not our place.
Okay,
this has nothing to do with there's no affinity or affection or anything there. My point is that we should not be going in and trying to.
I respect that. If you're elected president, you're going to go meet with Assad?
If there is an objective of national security, our national security, or the objective of peace.
Well, you'll determine the objective. You'll be the commander in chief.
Exactly.
So
look, meeting for the sake of a meeting is ridiculous.
But you already met with him when you weren't president. But now, if you're president.
I would meet with Assad, I would meet with Kim Jong-un, I would meet with Putin, I would meet with Xi Jinping. I would meet with those necessary to pursue the interests of our country, the American people, our national security, and the interests of peace, especially if it means taking those meetings will save the lives of Americans and will prevent us from continuing to needlessly lose more of our men and women in uniform in these ridiculous regime change wars.
The part that always rattles around in my head, Tulsi, is you object to regime change wars, but you want to overthrow Trump. and your attack on Hillary was kind of like labeling her a regime, right? Like
no. So
here's so we gotta get rid of Hillary
is our
Clinton.
country.
Yeah,
this is exactly what a democracy is about.
Like inconsistency.
Oh, it shouldn't, Paul.
Because
it
what's
shouldn't.
going to happen to the Democratic Party if you knock out Hillary Clinton? It's going to be chaos.
I will lead the Democratic Party.
It's going to be chaos. Like not even Tulsi Gabbard is going to be able to pick this shit up after Trump is gone, no matter who wins. Right?
Wholeheartedly disagree with your premise. I will be worried for our democracy if we are not doing all that we can to bring about positive change in our own government, where our country has gone wrong so many times in the past. And this is not only with conventional tactical warfare and trying to overthrow other countries' governments. It's been using all the different tools to intervene and get in other countries' business and tell them how they should live their lives or what they should do, just like we do not want Russia or China or any other country coming in and telling us, well, we think this person should lead your country. We think this is what you should do. We shouldn't be doing it to other countries.
I get the philosophy, right? And on some levels, I think folks may feel like we heard this from Bernie Sanders, right? And it was different. He was a socialist. He wasn't a veteran. He wasn't serving in the National Guard. So I think you said earlier that you're a realist.
Yeah.
But on some levels, you could argue this is not a realistic way to approach these situations. So that's where I find myself conflicted in understanding your position.
I think it's the most realistic approach. It's actually the most pragmatic approach that takes lessons from history. And that's where I look to. These aren't just some newfangled ideas I've come up with on my own. It's really looking back to what the cost and consequence has been really for decades, going back to the overthrow of the Queen of Hawaii.
I got it. I mean, just to extend this, and then we'll shift to another topic, because you've been very gracious in going through this with me. And I really wanted to have a discussion about it, because I feel like it doesn't happen, Tulsi.
Yeah.
I feel like you don't get a chance to really expand upon this. And on some levels, you don't get pushed. Like, because some folks just defer to you, or you don't get a chance on the stage. So I think it's important for people to understand that your ideas are evolved. You've thought them through. They're not rash, and they're principled. You have a worldview that a lot of people believe in and follow. So I think it's especially interesting for us as combat vets to scenario it out, right, and see how far it can go and what happens in a real world dynamic environment.
No, absolutely.
Right?
And I think this is this whole topic is one, and that you mentioned this, and this is what we're seeing in our town halls and our rallies and campaign gatherings across the country, is that we have Democrats, independents, libertarians, and Republicans coming and supporting my candidacy, recognizing, hey, we disagree with you, Tulsi, on maybe issues like A through X, but on this issue related to foreign policy and the cost of war, it is one that the vast majority of Americans are actually coming together around, recognizing, hey, what we've been through has cost us not only in American lives, not only in the lives of the people in the countries where we've waged these wars, but tying it back directly to the challenges we're facing here at home. Yeah. How since 9/11 alone, we've seen over $6 trillion waged on these wars: Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, And meanwhile, we are told time and again there's not enough money to make sure our teachers are paid to teach our kids, not enough money to ensure that every single American gets quality health care when they need it, not enough money to invest in infrastructure, basic infrastructure needs, clean water to drink. There are so many things that we need to be focused on and addressing here at home that require resources. And this is why the cost of war is central and directly connected to every other issue that we face.
And I respect your consistency. On some levels, your approach to Assad is not dissimilar from your approach to Tucker Carlson, right? Like some people will say, don't go on Tucker Carlson's show. He's an asshole. He's a racist. He's terrible for America. I imagine your argument would be, I want to discuss this with his audience.
That's exactly right.
But
that's
so
exactly
who's a
right.
bigger
Because,
who's a bigger asshole, Assad or Tucker Carlson?
I'm not even going to go there. I am not even going to to touch that.
But you understand where I'm coming from, right?
Well,
it's a similar strategy.
You're
giving you credit for being consistent, right? Like some people would say, don't go to Fox, right? A lot of Democrats are super pissed at you because you go on Tucker Carlson instead of going on Rachel Maddow. But there's a strategy there.
I would love for Rachel Maddow to have me on her show. Maybe you can ask her next time. I would love to go on her show.
I'm sure she will.
I think it's important that I am asking the American people for the opportunity to serve and lead them as their president. Yeah. Not just Democrats, not just people who agree with me, but all Americans. And guess what? There's a significant chunk of Americans who watch Fox News every single day.
Absolutely. So I go on Fox, I get the same shit for going on Fox.
CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, local news, whatever it is, I think it's important to be able to connect with and to deliver my message about what I hope to do for this country.
Yeah, and so I want to be mindful of your time. You've got to go to other events. Can I ask you a couple of quick questions that we ask of every guest?
All right.
You've kind of gotten into it, but Tulsi Gabbard, what makes you angry?
What makes me most angry are leaders in our country who do not take seriously the oath that we all take when we are sworn into office to protect and defend our Constitution and our country, and instead put their own interests, whether they be partisan interests or financial interests or whatever it may be, putting their own selfish interests ahead of the interests of the country. If that's what you're into, don't run for office, because we need leaders who are focused with a laser-like passion on how we together, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, can best serve the interests of the people and of our country.
And this show is about understanding that people have a right to be angry. And there's a righteousness to it. And it's the same anger that drove the civil rights movement, that drives people to get involved in politics, right? That drives people, I believe, in positive directions if it's channeled properly. Yeah. And so there's a lot of people who look to you as someone who represents that righteous anger and is trying to promote positive change. But running for office is also hard as hell. Like I've seen you go through this. You're lucky to have your sister alongside you. I can't think of anybody better I would want in my foxhole than my brother. The other question we ask of every guest is, especially folks are listening, maybe they're having a hard time. You meet a lot of people around the world who are having a hard time, who are looking for inspiration or just perspective. Yeah. So like beyond the politics, not like a political answer, but Tulsi Gabbard, at your core, what makes you happy?
And this is the honest to God truth. What makes me happy is when I can be in a place where I am being of service to others, where I'm having a positive impact for other people in their lives. It's something that I experienced just when I was young, when I was a kid growing up in Hawaii, surfing, love the ocean,
surfing really
hiking.
Makes you happy.
I mean, surfing, right? I have a lot of fun, absolutely. Yeah. Surfing makes me happy. But as a kid surfing, like I would get pissed off when I would see a whole bunch of trash on the beach and people just saying like, I don't care about our playground, our home. And so getting my friends and going picking up trash on the weekends, clean up the beach, like that was like, wow, like I'm feeling like I can actually make a difference here. And that's what has been and continues to motivate me to go through those tough days, to run through those obstacles, no matter what, because ultimately it's not about me.
When you're growing up in Hawaii, surfing and planting those seeds of activism, cleaning up your beach, cleaning up your area, Tulsi Gabbard, what was your first car?
My first car was a old beat-up Toyota Camry. that lasted less than a year before the transmission blew. I grew up doing martial arts, and I was training as a teenager like 4 hours a day in Brazilian capoeira martial arts. And so I was saving up my money. Like I wanted to go and like train for a month in Brazil on capoeira martial arts. And then I was faced with the decision of doing the responsible thing and getting a car so I could drive to work and school, or go to Brazil. And my mother told me later she was so afraid that if I went, I would never come home. I did the responsible thing, bought a shitty car that broke down on me less than a year later, and still to this day have never made it to Brazil.
What color was the car?
It was light blue. Yeah, I won't say who sold it to me, but it's somebody who's close to me who said it was a great deal, it'd be a great car, and then the transmission blew, and I drive a stick still now as a result.
Driving a stick in Hawaii has got to be tough.
Traffic, yeah.
Traffic, hills,
yeah.
mountains, right? Like
yeah.
It's still, and you've never still never been to Brazil. I sold my drum set to buy my first car.
Oh,
and,
wow.
Yep.
That's a very adult-like decision.
No, it was like, it was also like my family was so pissed about the drums. They were so ready to have me out of the house.
Oh, okay.
But it was the only thing I owned of any significant value was this drum set.
Yeah.
So it was way before.
I think I bought the car for like $1,200.
Wow.
So maybe I should have expected it to break down. I don't know.
No. Okay. And look, I want to give you one chance to talk about something else too. You've been intrepid on veterans issues. So many veterans issues. You were in New York today. You met with 9/11 first responders. We've covered that issue a lot on this show. We had Rob Serra. We've had a tremendous support across this community for the Victims Compensation Fund extension, and many other pushes to connect with and support people. And you've also been an advocate for burn pits, which I try to explain to civilians is almost like 9/11 health impacts for veterans. Right? We were all overseas. We breathed in a bunch of shit, and now a lot of people are getting sick. And it could be our generation's Agent Orange. But can you talk a little bit about who you met with today and what you did in New York?
Yeah, we met with the family members of 3 people who were killed in that attack. One was a first responder, New York City fire chief, who survived the first round, then went back to help more people and was killed then on 9/11. I think you know who I'm talking about, a guy named Chris, who is now serving in the fire department here, as well as 2 other family members, and some former law enforcement officers who have been working around trying to bring justice for those families who were killed on that day and the first responders who've lost their lives since. There were 2 main things that we talked about is the need for these family members to gain closure by getting access to the information necessary to be able to continue their lawsuit against Saudi Arabia. And number 2, how these families and first responders are rallying around support for burn pits, recognizing that this is the Agent Orange of our generation, and that so many veterans, like many of the first responders, like yourself, have been exposed to incredible toxic chemicals of which you can't even begin to put together what they all are, and are experiencing devastating health consequences, not just respiratory, but many others, early stage cancers and other things that are taking the lives of our brothers and sisters in uniform. So these are 2 major areas that I'm looking forward to continue to work with them on, making progress on and addressing.
Would you ever be VA secretary? Would you ever take the job of VA secretary? Because that makes...
I would consider it...
It's as complicated as Syria. I mean, it's very, very difficult.
I know.
It's a vexing bureaucratic problem.
And it requires strong leadership
Yeah.
and the support of an administration who will back the kind of serious change that the VA needs.
Yeah, but would you do the job if down the road someone else is president and you were asked? Have you ever thought about running the VA?
I'd consider it. Again, looking at the circumstances, I wouldn't take a job if my hands were tied behind my back.
Yeah.
But I think having someone at the head of the VA who is a veteran, who understands in a deeply personal way the serious problems, and can be the kind of advocate that veterans need to get through the red tape and the bureaucracy to actually just get shit done, I think is necessary.
Absolutely. And there's never been a female VA secretary.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It never has been. So
Wow.
if it's you or someone else, it will be the first.
Yeah.
And especially with that hugely, the biggest, the fastest growing percentage of the population is female veterans, as you know.
Yeah.
But continue to be woefully underserved. And you've done so much to change the way people understand what service is about, what patriotism is about, and I know that I am extremely grateful for you. You've given us a lot of time.
Thank you.
You've been great in tangling with me on some of these issues that I think are important. Like what you've always shown me is that we can disagree, we can still work together.
Yeah.
Right, and that's really important right now. Despite your,
It really
epic
is.
clash with Hillary Clinton right now, for the most part, your career has been about crossing lines to the point where you've got a lot of knives in your back. I remember, a lot of Democrats said they would not work with a Republican on some of the issues we brought forward, and Republicans said the same thing. But I really think it's a testament to your dedication to the country and especially to the veterans community that you were willing to take those shots at times so that we could get shit done.
Yeah.
And I have to, one last point in the interview, I have to do the giving of the gifts.
Uh-oh.
Is this Aloha Spirit to give gifts?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. So you have
Wow.
3 different components.
Okay.
And I can hold your mic.
Spoken
if
like
it
a
makes it easier.
true officer. 3 different components.
3 different components.
Okay.
The first is American made, and that is Angry American
Oscar
swag.
Mike. Nice.
Can I hold your mic?
show
so
and
I can
tell.
Pick it up. Thanks. I'll hold your mic. There we go. See. So that is made by veterans at Oscar Mike, veteran-owned, American-made
Very
company.
cool.
So you've got that, and it's comfortable. You can
Very
wear it next
cool.
time you're practicing Miss Martial Arts,
Yeah.
getting ready for your next Joe Rogan appearance.
Absolutely.
And then we talked about this earlier. You saw that Rogan had Snowden on today.
Yeah, I actually am looking forward to watching that. That should be interesting.
And I know this interview is long, but it's a third of the length of talking to Joe Rogan.
Are you
Yeah,
serious?
you did like 3 hours with
Oh,
Rogan.
yeah. I thought the Snowden one. Someone said it was extremely long.
Oh, I think it's about 3 hours. Yeah. But
Interesting.
your interview with Rogan was long. Like I
Interesting.
think I drove
It was.
somewhere and back, and I was still. My wife is like, "Is Tulsi still talking?"
She's
I'm like,
still
"Yeah, she's on
yapping
Rogan, man."
away.
Rogan, like, you don't take any breaks
Yeah,
from Rogan either. You don't go to
no,
the bathroom or like go get a
no,
drink. 3
nothing.
hours straight in
No,
that
no,
Rogan
there's-
world.
No.
That's nuts.
Yeah,
Okay, but
it's
anyway,
pretty cool, though.
moving along through the gifts.
All right.
Then you also have a choice to make. Every guest has been asked. So the show started around Easter.
Okay.
There are peeps in there, and there are blue, yellow, and pink. And the question is, if you have to choose one color, would you choose yellow, pink, or blue, and why?
Blue. It's just one of my favorite colors.
It's a great answer. You
Yeah.
probably don't eat peeps, right?
I don't.
Yeah, I figured. And you also don't drink whiskey, but
Which is component number 3.
yes. So we always give a guest an American-made whiskey, and this is a repeat. I did it
Hearts
last week.
of Oak Militia.
But it's also Fort Hamilton whiskey, and it's
Uh-huh.
named after and inspired by Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And it's a rye whiskey, which is an old whiskey that was made often in New York, especially before Prohibition. But it's got a military-inspired story. And
Yeah.
although you don't drink, maybe you can give it to someone else as a gift. You can give it to your
you.
sister. I don't know if she drinks. but
Thank you.
anyone else around you over the last couple weeks as you've been taking some shots may need a drink, so they can enjoy that.
Thank you.
But-
This is incredibly kind, and it's great to see you always and appreciate, just the great work that you've been doing over the years, and I know the work that you're continuing to do.
You're an incredible patriot, Tulsi, and I think that you're redefining patriotism, and that's uncomfortable for some people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
And
and
I
that's
think
okay, though.
many of us got our back up in the last couple weeks when folks attack your patriotism.
Yeah.
Because patriotism comes in many forms, and it's not always conventional, but you've been consistent in your dedication to make this country better. And I really am always consistently inspired by your example. Just how often you're getting up there and taking swings and work. It's hard fucking work. It really is, and people don't appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I think especially, the path you've chosen has been an unconventional one, but it's really been inspiring to watch. And I talk about every guest shaping, the past, the present, and the future of this country. And no matter what happens in 2020, you're definitely going to be shaping the future of this country. I'm very grateful that you took so much time to talk to
Thank
me
you. Well,
and to
thanks for
share
the
your
opportunity.
thoughts with the audience.
It's always good to see you.
You got
Look
a lot
forward
of fans
to
out
more.
there now.
Thank you, Paul.
Next, can you fight? Like, would you actually fight somebody for charity?
I would.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson?
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe Joe Rogan can set it up. We talked about, Chris Cuomo and I talked about fighting Hannity and Tucker Carlson for charity.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I have to go in the middle because I'm not even a Democrat, but I just would love to jump in the ring with those guys. But I'm going to ditch Cuomo, ask you to be my tag team partner.
I'm in, man. For a good cause. For a good cause.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming to New York. We appreciate you so much.
It's good to see you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tulsi Gabbard, live from New York.